The way we're going to structure today is I'll do my little prayer of gratitude that I always do, and then we'll go into, I'll spend a couple minutes reviewing what is energy healing, and then we'll go into today's topic, which is practicing energy healing. So it would be good for you to have some practical points on that. But I definitely want to also do a little review of yesterday as well, because the Friday session, which is in the same vein, always is a bit of a setup for the Saturday session. So I don't want anybody who was not here last night to miss anything. Okay. That's the preamble. Now we do it. Thank you to being for everything. Thank you for being the flow of wisdom and to the eternal tradition of wisdom, the great holy tradition of wisdom, for making it possible, for stabilizing and integrating that aspect of being which allows for the unfoldment, the sequential unfoldment of consciousness from the unmanifest level of creation through to the manifest level of creation. So thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who's here in this live webinar, to the divine in you, and to the divine in your ancestors. So thank you to you and all of the contributors to your lovely, beautiful expressions of God physiologies. Thank you for blessing our session today and for the gift of working concisely and efficiently, profoundly, for the ability to address any specific concerns people might have in the highest and best possible way, and to support the flow of all of the resources Dorothy has to everybody who's here so that we can all become self-sufficient and self-sustaining in the energy healing process. All right. Okay, so that's our little prayer. Next step, specifically, especially for the new people, but also for the people who've been here before, the little review of what is energy healing. Energy healing is our ability to use our consciousness to heal our bodies. Our bodies, which are made of flesh, are at a finer level also made of consciousness. In other words, if we look at the source of creation, the material of the source of creation, the non-material material before any material is produced, what we find is that there is consciousness. So consciousness, we can think of pure consciousness, silent, ocean of consciousness, is the foundation of all the manifest level of creation, which means our bodies are also essentially made of consciousness. So when we heal, what we do is we use the material out of which the body is already constructed to fold back on itself, to produce balance and realignment with totality, because that infinite ocean of consciousness embraces everything in creation. So we can think of it as wholeness or totality in its nature. And so wherever our awareness or attention, which is consciousness, wherever our attention goes, it activates that quality of totality, that quality of wholeness. And when there is a symptom or an illness in the physiology, that's an indication that there's some incompletion, something that's not whole. And so the attention naturally brings back wholeness. The art to energy healing is exactly where do we focus the attention? Exactly how do we focus the attention? So that's the tricky bit, but it's not so tricky. So another part of the energy healing process is to outline some points of reference in the infinite, unbounded ocean of consciousness, which is at the foundation of everything. We need some points of reference so we know when we start with a symptom, like how do we get from the symptom to the cause or the seed of the symptom, And then how from the seed do we eliminate that symptom from its seed? With awareness. So how do we do that? So we need points of reference. So what I've done is I have outlined a few, some. There are others, there are infinite numbers of them, but a few points of reference just to give us some guideposts. And those include, think of a grid. They include a range from very concrete and manifest, like the physical manifest body, all the way to more abstract, mental, emotional, and then more abstract, just deepest feeling, like that, intuition, and then very, very abstract, collective levels of self and so forth, and then to the source of creation, pure consciousness. So we can think of a y-axis on our grid, from concrete up here down to infinitely abstract, non-manifest at the base. There are other points of reference, such as the x-axis, that ranges from realms of creation, which are very dark and dense and kind of hellish, up to very heavenly, light, bright realms of creation. And there's like a z-axis that ranges from smaller than the smallest to bigger than the biggest. And there's also another axis, which at one point I was thinking, well, we've run out of letters. If we started with Y, we could call the W axis, or we could call it the A axis or something. But there's another axis that ranges from fully dull, like deepest sleep, non-awareness, to full conscious awareness, full brightness, full value of awareness of consciousness. These points of reference are important. I will refer to them. Also, so that's basically an overview of what's energy healing. We're focusing our attention. We have certain channels or ranges through which we focus attention. All of these lines that I've pointed out on this grid begin and end in the source of creation. They begin and end in totality. So you can imagine on this y-axis, if we have concrete here and the source of creation down here, what's happening is from the source of all being, the axes are actually loops, right? Because they loop, it loops from smaller than the smallest, and it loops out and becomes bigger, 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 becomes bigger than the biggest. And at that point, when it's bigger than the biggest, it's infinitely big, and then it's back to infinity again. So the infinity at either end of each of these axes is the same infinity. So you can think of the infinity kind of embraces everything, and then it pulls out of its own nature, it creates something, and then it falls back into its own nature like that. And that's exactly what awareness does when we heal, because we're living in our bodies, which are out, we imagine infinity. I'm holding infinity in a point, holding infinity in my hand. And, manifested form comes out, and we have a physical body, and then awareness folds back into infinity like that. At the point of the physical body, some imbalance or some discomfort is up here. Then what happens is another loop comes out of the field of consciousness, a loop of awareness, consciousness comes out and is structured in such a way that it interacts with that symptom. It interacts with the source of the illness. And that could be like emotional, or it could be lodged. It could be like stuck in the system as discordant feelings or belief systems, or even stuck at the collective levels of self, the ancestry or the long history of the soul. And it affects that. It affects it, the second loop that comes out and touches the symptom or the illness. And it changes it. It changes the consciousness that's behind the illness. Somehow, when pure being, which is perfect in its own nature, we were starting to get into the review of yesterday, comes out and manifests all that perfect symmetry and embracing of totality, it has to break a little bit in order for the relative material level of creation to come forth. That's why, like, my skin is here, but it's not over there. It's not over there. Because the symmetry has been broken. At the level of pure consciousness, it's like a completely homogeneous, it's like a homogeneous field of consciousness. But out here at the surface, you know, you've got the leaves on the tree, and then you've got the trunk, and then you've got the rock up here, and you know, they're different pieces, they're different bits and pieces. Everything's kind of separated out. They're boundaries and limitations. So unbounded comes up, and it morphs itself into boundaries, and then it falls back down again. All right, so review of yesterday. In this big ocean of consciousness, I discovered since our last webinar, there's this one spot that is so key to the healing process. And it was very exciting when I realized that. Now, for a long time, we've been making light medicines and using our hand chakras and doing all kinds of stuff. And we're going to get into some of that today, because I want to leave you with some nice practical points, stuff, you know, take homes. But all of those techniques, all of the techniques that any energy healers use, come from the source of creation. So we need to dive into the source of creation and see what exactly is happening there. So some of you have heard me talk in the past about the divine dialogue, which is a transformational process that takes place at every point in creation and is the fundamental for the energy healing process and all evolutionary processes. And it can be compared to the hero's journey, where the prince is living in his comfy castle, but for some reason he has to leave, and so he leaves the castle and he's out on his own, and whatever was at home. This is the mythical tale, right? This is a typical mythical tale. We can look back in history and see it told over and over and over and over and over again in most Hollywood movies and all the ancient tales. He leaves home, out on his journey. He attains some skills along the way, some resources, but what he had breaks down. It breaks down, and he's alone. And there's a point at the bottom of that tale where, you know, the hero's out on the rainy night and he's lost the girl, and it looks like hopeless, right? There's that point. In every story, there's that point where it's like total chaos. And from the total chaos, a transformation occurs, and the hero is reborn as the king. And he comes back not as a prince, but he returns a king by facing his greatest fears. Okay, so that's kind of a recap of the divine dialogue, sort of. Like, that's one way through myth. That's one way we look at it, but it's so big and it's so abstract and it's so profound that storytelling is one of the better ways to look at that particular process. Another way to look at that process is the yin-yang symbol. It's a visual representation of this divine dialogue. There's the chaotic side of creation, and there's the creative or expanding, orderly side of creation. So you've got order and chaos, you know, like on each other like that, and they're kind of curling around each other. And they curl this story, the story of the chaos that destroys and the order that creates is told at every point in creation. All right. So in the story, in the yin-yang symbol, or in the hero's journey, there's this one critical point, like the most critical point. In the yin-yang symbol, according to the Taoists, that point is in the line that's between the light and the dark. That's the exact spot where consciousness is dedicated to reside in order to maintain balance between those two forms. In the story of the hero, in the hero's journey story, it's at the point where he faces his greatest fear, and he's got one foot still back home. Like, there's a little piece of him that's like, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get home somehow, right? I'm going to win. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to face my enemy and succeed. There's a foothold in order, but he's facing his chaos, right? And that he uses his little pieces of order that he collected along the path, and then faces the chaos and comes out with an integrated experience of both the chaos and the order that he brought with him. And the order at that point is reborn, basically, from the experience. It's reborn anew. Okay, so the point of, within the context of our our grid, our diagram, is we go down, down. We take the y-axis and we divide it into 8 parts. The bottom 2 parts are the unmanifest. In Sanskrit, this word is para-prakriti. That means para, before, prakriti, nature. So before nature manifests, there's this level of creation that has deepest silence, which also corresponds to that other axis of when consciousness is there, but it's fully asleep, right? It's consciousness, but it's kind of like not aware consciousness. And then consciousness, which is awake. So consciousness, which is very sort of flat, resting. You could think of it as pure, the ocean of pure consciousness, but resting, versus the ocean of pure consciousness getting ready to do something, waking up inside of itself. And right at that spot, there's a relationship. There's a relationship, and it's a relationship of transformation between that full asleep state of being and that alert, profound, awake state of being. And that relationship is exceedingly tender because it resides in the state of wholeness. It is also able to embrace perfection. It's able to embrace absolute consciousness. It's still in that what the physicists call the unified field of all the laws of nature that is super symmetrical. It's perfectly symmetrical. It's like perfect. So that's the spot where awareness needs to go to wake up our healing potential. Every human being resides in the whole grid. The whole grid belongs to us. We generally experience our world through our physiology, we interpret through our senses of perception, our nervous system. The brain interprets what the senses perceive. So we're starting from this point of awareness or point of recognition of the whole universe. But if we follow what we know ourselves to be to deeper, more abstract levels, there's no part of the universe that isn't somehow touched by consciousness. All you have to do is think of the sun, and you already touched the sun. You touched it with your awareness. Just like if you feel like somebody's looking at you and you turn around and they're looking at you, right? Well, when we put our awareness out to the sun and touch the sun knows that we're looking at it. The sun knows that we put our attention there. So our awareness is pure consciousness that we have control over, so much autonomy and control over, we can move it anywhere. I was watching this video about black holes the other day, and the guy saying nothing can escape a black hole. You know, even light can't escape a black hole. Well, you know what can escape a black hole? Consciousness can escape a black hole. You can put your consciousness in the black hole. You can pull it right back out again. No problem. It's like, no problem, man. Consciousness is absolute. It moves faster than the speed of light. How many light years does it take to get to a black hole? How many light years does it take my consciousness to get to a black hole? Instantly. So, there are no barriers. There are no barriers in the ocean of consciousness. There are no barriers. All possibilities. This is what we mean by all possibilities in the field of consciousness. And this is what we mean by, this is the foundation for using consciousness as a means to heal the body, because there are no barriers. And it is a field of all possibilities. And you can do it. This isn't just about me doing it. This is about you doing it. So on that note, that's a lot of preliminary stuff. One of my thoughts for today's healing session, and this is me experimenting, this is about my, what is it, Tom? About like the 50th or how many webinars have we done? I'm not sure. We started webinars in like 2015. We do them every 3 weeks. Anyway, we've done a lot of webinars, but I thought I'd like to try one little thing new, because I want this to be an experiential session for you. I just gave you like 20 minutes of theory. So let's get into some experiential stuff. Yeah, so I want to do some experiential stuff, and I thought it would be really valuable for all of us. Please be easy with yourself as we do this, but it would be really valuable to take a couple of minutes and put our attention, because energy healing is about focusing attention intelligently, right? We want to put our attention on the spot between asleep consciousness and warmed up awake consciousness. Not manifest yet, just in the field of awareness or consciousness itself. And I thought it would be nice to take a couple of minutes in pure silence, just in silence. Those of you who meditate, enjoy that. Enjoy your meditation. And we're just going to take about 2 minutes to do that. And then at the end, I'll say, let's open our eyes. And when I say that, give yourself like 30 seconds or a minute or something to quietly, gently open your eyes, because the awareness can become very settled in an exercise like this. So I'm going to close my eyes. I'm not going to speak. We're just going to have our silence here. I will stop speaking in a second. And the idea is to feel into your own consciousness and feel that spot between the silent, infinite ocean of consciousness and its warmed up state. It's very delicate, very tender, and luscious. All right. Let's open our eyes. All right. So as an experiment, I know some people are, sorry, did I speak too soon? Just letting everyone come out quietly. I know some people are really familiar with that place in their own consciousness, and some people aren't. So we can look more into sort of leveraging that quiet time, but it's good to at least give it a shot, you know? Just close the eyes and just feel what's going on inside the self. One of the things I noticed with everyone in the field, I was watching what was happening. Everyone was able to connect to a certain degree at the level of their hearts. That was interesting. And I wasn't expecting that necessarily. But a lot of people were uncertain at the level of the mind. So the heart knew. It knew, oh, that's that lovely, think of the sleep of a baby, you know, that lovely, cozy, luscious, deep, renewing, regenerating quality of rest in the mind. But then because we don't generally have a good set of terms to describe that experience, because it's not defined verbally, there's a tendency to discount it or doubt it or not be sure that the experience is or was really there. So I offer to not mind too much what the mind does, because the mind will do what it does. It'll run through its little loops of thought, and am I really doing it? And where is it? I'm supposed to feel something in an ocean, and it's a big ocean, and I'm not sure where that is, and so forth. So don't worry. Everybody always experiences it every day, because we naturally go through that gap. We're going to call it a gap. We naturally go through the gap when we change states of consciousness from waking to dreaming, or dreaming to sleeping, or sleeping to dreaming, or sleeping to waking. Every time you switch gears, like being in a car, first gear you go into neutral, then you go into second gear. Oh, I saw it as a point before a lotus appears on the top of the water. Oh, thank you for that one. Yeah, that was from a beautiful lady in Scotland. And thank you for your exquisite capability to translate subtle experiences into visual images. She's an expert, you guys. My gal and the goddess of Scotland, she sits at the doorway to the continent, right where all the devas come into the continent. It's very sweet. Thank you for sharing that. Beautiful. All right. So this is the spot right before the lotus. You can think of it like a body of water, and the lotus of manifestation comes off the body of the water, and it's that point before the plant breaks through the surface, but it has decided what it's going to do. So we have something in energy healing. I have a sort of technology called the energy healing algorithm, which I have laid out before, but it ties really, really nicely into this process. So let's just look at that, because that's a practical point, especially for the new people, that we can look at. So the premise of the healing algorithm works on the premise of this loop of consciousness, this loop that consciousness makes at every point in creation, where we start with the imbalance, a symptom, and it doesn't matter if you're feeling perfectly well. You can find something that you'd like to see improved, changed, healed, or whatever. Or if you have any specific healing concerns, you can focus on those. We take the symptom in the awareness, and then quietly allow awareness to settle into the home of silence. Think of it like the womb of mother or something, mother of the universe. The mother of creation is at the source of all of us. In that silence, that incompletion will either be illuminated and revealed for its true nature, because maybe if you picked up your symptom, maybe you didn't pick up the whole ball of wax, right? Because if we're going to clear a symptom or an illness, we want to clear it completely. So we pick up what we know of it, and we drop it into the field of pure silence. The field of pure silence sees everything. It knows it's pure consciousness, right? So it knows everything. And it brings forth to the surface a definition of that symptom or illness that's better defined. And in many cases, that means the seed. The seed comes forth. I'm looking into the field of our collective, and what I'm seeing is hyper awareness to chaos and suffering. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Look at this great comment. So this lady from Louisville, right? Louisville. She says, an issue that I sometimes have is my hyper awareness to chaos and suffering and possible the lower, more dense realms of consciousness. The nuclear warhead mantra has been helpful and disconnected a lot of it. Great. When I follow your healing webinar for humanity a little bit ago, we dipped into suffering, lower, more denser levels. I had difficulty pulling out of it without somehow attaching to me. I can feel, see, sometimes hear the suffering. And you don't want to lose sensitivity. It's important. I do too. And I sense it. I can sense it very acutely. Meditating just now, the over-awareness of this lower, heavy suffering is immense, huge distraction. Wait on the path. Good. Well, I'm glad you mentioned it. Let's address it. We can use that as the example. And one of the things I really appreciate about you offering this particular experience is that part of the review from yesterday was we did this massive healing for the collective consciousness of the world. And we touched on that, but we obviously didn't extract it completely. So thank you very much. So here's the deal. The x-axis ranges from really awful, really hellish, dense, heavy realms of creation to really light, heavenly, beautiful realms of creation. And our physiologies, in some cases, at the collective level, okay, here, at the finest manifest level of self, we are collective. In the previous set of webinars, I did a whole, and I think it's uploaded as a freebie on YouTube. There's a video about the 7 layers of the causal body. I'm not sure that's its title, but probably should be. But anyway, there's something about the causal body there. You can look that up. But the causal body is the first sprouting of manifestation. And it's so delicate. It's so tender. And it's also collective. So it's the area of ourself where we connect in with all the rest of creation. We connect in with all these realms of creation, some that are darker, some that are lighter. We range from here up to here. So we are bigger. Remember what Krishna taught Arjuna about how no one dies. We might say we only change containers, but an enlightened person never dies. Thank you. That's from Ogden. Thank you for that contribution. Yes. So we are bigger. You are bigger. You are bigger than any dense realms of creation. You are bigger than any malevolent beings that reside out of a body. Why? Because we have bodies. Our bodies make us bigger. Our bodies, we think, no, my body is like a little teenier than a grain of sand in the universe. And the beings without bodies, they can make their bodies stretch around and big. But you know what? We also own that level. We own this level and we own that level. Humans range from unmanifest, completely unmanifest, all the way up to fully physical. So we own the physical range and the mental range, the etheric range, the astral range, the emotional range. We own the subtler ranges, the collective range, the finest manifest range. We own it all. You possess all this as your being. So what the denser, darker energies can do is they can go in and make a little imbalance or a little corruption, if you will, at that collective, because that's how far they go. Every being comes from the being, right? So we've got being, and then we've got beings manifesting like lotus flowers growing out of the water, right? Human beings grow all the way to the top, to the big. We're big beings. Some beings only manifest a little bit. They stay close to the field of pure consciousness. Pardon? Seaweed. So So the thing is that if a being's range is here, or along the x-axis from heavenly to hellish, there's a being who only resides down here at the hellish end, or there's an angelic being who only resides up here at the heavenly end. We range the whole range. We own it all. Seeing my first, oh, okay. Another question, I'll address that in a second. Let me just finish this thought. Thank you. So we enjoy the whole range. As such, the reason we're doing energy healing together is so that we can gain some control or mastery or autonomy over these areas that up till now haven't been very accessible because we haven't had ways to describe our experience. We have these experiences a lot during dream and sleep time, right? How many people have had experiences of like going different places, they have different feelings in them, or, you know, exploring beautiful places out west or whatever. Yeah, right? Lots of people have done that. So, so in energy healing, what we're doing is we're learning. And so this is the healing for the lady with the experience of feeling the heaviness. We're establishing balance. That's the secret. That's the trick. And it's not such a big trick, right? Because we all know how to ride a bike, most of us, right? It's a balance. That within the context of the ocean of consciousness, there's a point of balance. Perfect balance. So I'm just feeling it in my physiology. And what happens is the way the human body is constructed, it's so beautiful. It naturally reflects. Our bodies are kind of like reflectors of the universe, basically. So that balance and the group, it's like it wakes up from that point where the waking up happens, right? From the sleeping consciousness to the waking consciousness, right in that gap, balance wakes up. And it resides in the physiology as a kind of like a resonation of consciousness. Consciousness, which is an unmanifest material, basically starts to hum or vibrate in that quality of balance. And I'm just feeling it moving into the physiology. And for the lady who asked this question, I'm feeling it moving a lot into the head area and then also into the gut area. Your heart is already in a state of balance because the nature of the heart area is to maintain balance between all the different, like it's the fourth of the 7 chakras. So it's like the one in the middle, and it's the middle of the 3 mahamarmas. So it's already balanced, but it's the 2 ends that have come out of balance from each other. Beautiful, beautiful. So she's saying it's working. Wow, tears. Yeah, so from the point of balance, then this is like a point of autonomy where one can kind of look at both ends of the spectrum of the heavenly ends and the hellish ends and kind of see how they all have their place in creation. They exist because there's a reason. And the reason is that the darker energies pull in a particular, they curve consciousness in a particular way, and the heavenly energies curve consciousness in a different opposite way. And so when you put them together, they're pushing and pulling in opposite directions of each other, and they're like massaging the ocean of consciousness. They create the waves in the ocean of consciousness that allows consciousness to rise up and to create the manifest field of creation. So you need both. We have to have both. We have to have both the chaotic side of the hero's journey and the returning orderly side of the hero's journey. We have to have them. But the reason that it's a little uncomfortable sometimes is that the ancestors have felt they didn't fully, they didn't have a very clear way to verbalize. They hadn't really figured out that consciousness is an ocean and that you need points of reference and that you can actually fathom the ocean of consciousness with your awareness. I mean, there were certain things they hadn't figured out. So because of that, there was a lot of like, there's a word that starts with an S, superstition. There were like superstitions and fears and stuff associated with the fractal nature of the ocean of consciousness. My son was reading a book called The Painted Bird, which is, it's a bit of a grim ride, okay? The Painted Bird is a book that was written about an orphan going around Eastern Europe during World War II. And so it's a grim ride, but it very nicely describes the kind of a lot of the sort of superstitions and the way people thought about things. And, you know, the story of the painted bird is the man was a bird seller, but he was having troubles in his relationship. Yeah, it feels ancestral, right? Okay, good. So we're healing for the ancestors while I tell the story, because we love the ancestors, and all of our Europeans are with us today too, because we're at a good time for Europe. So God, shout out to the Europeans. God bless you. I love you so much. Anyway, so he sells birds, but he's having trouble in his love life. So the way he handled it, and it came in the story because this is how people actually did stuff, like, you know, 100 years ago. He would take a bird and he'd paint it colorful, a live bird, paint it pretty colors, and then release it when a group of birds of his type were in the nearby vicinity. And he would go up and try to like mingle with his kind, but because he was painted, they would reject him and they would kill him. And then he would go examine the body of the painted bird, and based on the injuries that had been inflicted upon the bird, this would tell him, it would show him what exactly was wrong in his relationship. And so that's an example of how the ancestors kind of dealt with this. They dealt with it by realizing that the universe is fractal in nature. And so every single thing, like, you guys can't see my background, but there's this like tree right here on my background. And, you know, we can see all these beautiful patterns in the wood on the tree. And we know that these patterns on the wood are not so different from the water that once flowed through this canyon that flowed in this very spot, right? So these shapes in the roots of the tree also reflect the shapes that the water takes. And also the rocks down here were carved out by the water. So they also reflect those currents and eddies of the water. So it's all these patterns that reflect over and over again to each other. Okay, I hope that helped. And again, to the ancestors, because this was their way, superstition was their way of understanding what we're talking about now. And everybody was just trying to do their best. They were trying to heal. They were trying to live good lives, you know. And the ancestors, our ancestors, your and my ancestors, are the ones who were the survivors, who did really well and produced offspring and all that. So God bless everyone. All of them, all of them. We couldn't do it without every last one. Even the ones who didn't produce offspring, all precious, so precious. Thank you for that. Okay, here's a very, very spiritual lady. She's an energy healer also. And she says, seeing my first out-of-body experience as a metaphor for what you describe, one with the universe, one with love, one with the silence by the sea, the rings of my shell expanded out infinitely and return, bringing light, love, half on land and half at sea, knowing, sharing, caring, thou. Beautiful. That was so beautiful. When I started reading it, I didn't realize, oh, it's a poem. It's so sweet. It's so sweet. Thank you for sharing that. Exactly. So you know that spot. I know some people in the group are very, very familiar with that spot in the y-axis. It's actually in all the different axes, right? In the x-axis, it's right smack in the middle. In the y-axis, it's down at the very subtle level of the form of being. But it's this point of perfect symmetry, perfect balance, very rich, luscious, yummy, very safe. It feels very safe and very full level of consciousness. And from there, all the healing energies arise. So we know where to go if we want to get things done. And it's yourself. Something it's self-possessed, man. Everybody knows. Okay, here's another question from one of our Europeans. Dear Dorothy, I experience daily headaches and fatigue, low energy levels. How can I practically deal with it in such a way that my own inner strength and wisdom about what is truly needed can fully emerge? Wow. I love the fact that this question also kind of contains the answer, because what she's saying is, how can I deal with it in a way that my inner strength and wisdom emerges fully? ultimately, when our bodies are so smart, right? So they're always talking to us. And their language is the language of perception and experience. So I'm going to close my window for a second because it's, thank you. It's a little bit disorienting for me to be looking off to the side. So yeah, so our bodies are the mirrors of the universe, and they speak the language of perception and experience. And they're very extremely sensitive to everything that's important. They're extremely sensitive to your own priority system. And they're extremely sensitive to what is meaningful to you. So when the soul that occupies the body has a deep desire to unfold inner wisdom, then the body will often fall down in a way that causes circumstances, the way you handle that discomfort, the circumstances of that handling that discomfort will be such that naturally you will do what you need to do in order for that awareness to unfold. So when the body feels really hard, tired and yucky and depressed, first thing we do is rest. But once the resting is done, we want to get on with life. The next thing is we have to look at which are the systems of the body which are giving rise to that fatigue and that lower energy levels. Where is the energy blocked, right? Because the energy, it's infinite energy at the field of pure consciousness. And as the lotus is trying to grow up out of the water, somewhere along that system, there's a blockage. So because the universe is fractal and in nature, we can almost look anywhere and find the blockage. Like the guy examining the dead bird's body to figure out what's going on with his girlfriend, right? That we can look anywhere in it. However, we can also be a little bit practical. Because different kinds of messages from the body are pointed to, it's a language. The body speaks to us in a language. So if we look at this thing of feeling lowness in the system and depression, physically depressed in the body, depression usually comes from a feeling, a difficulty dealing with the sort of philosophical, if you will, the philosophical problem of one's place in creation. When the body falls down like that, it stops action, right? Because you can't, if I break a small bone in my body, I can still keep, I can still be full of energy and forceful and, full of the force of my intention and moving forward. But when the body's fallen down like that, it's like lots of different things are happening at once. It's like the body's not absorbing nutrients in a practical manner. The immune system is absolutely depressed. I bet you also find that you tend to be a little sensitive to infections and stuff like that. The circulatory system also, the nervous system also. So I'm looking at the body and I'm seeing it on the level of systems. The philosophical challenge there is, and this also is ancestral, by the way, is looking at the world in a kind of black and white fashion. Like one can say, well, maybe nothing matters. Maybe my life doesn't matter. Maybe life really isn't meaningful. It's like we live, we die. 500 years from now, no one's going to remember us. No one's going to individually, it's like, why am I doing anything? Why bother to do anything? Why bother to do anything? I can just sit on my couch and relax. Give it up. Give it up. I can just give it up. And it doesn't matter. If we take the idea that what we do, what we say, what we think, what happens doesn't matter, then you can just not do anything. It's okay. Everybody's loved. So you don't have to worry about that, So that's one way that's black and white. That's one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is everything matters. And usually a person who's got this sort of depression in the system, it comes from being on this side. Everything I do matters. Oh my God, I can't make a mistake. If I make a mistake, it's the flap of the butterfly's wing down in South America somewhere causes a tidal wave on the other side of the earth or something. That's that principle that if everything I do matters, then the pressure and the responsibility that's on me is so great that I can't bear it. And so when a person's faced with that, it can often cause them to sort of flip over to the other side of, well, then nothing matters. Because it seems like a relief to go into nothing matters by comparison. Everything matters. Everything matters, but it doesn't mean that you have to take ownership for the way you deal with everything. Oh, Jordan Peterson wouldn't like to hear me say that. Sorry, he's somebody I listen to a bit. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the individuality, we only are gripped by these two sides of the spectrum when small individuality, small identification, small ego, small self, small being is driving the vehicle. When awareness is able to find its balance point along these different axes, that significant point, then who is doing the action? Divine being is doing everything. There is no piece of me. There's no bit that isn't made of consciousness, the ocean of consciousness. And the ocean of consciousness is present and evolving through every point in creation. So that means that, yeah, what we do is really important. It's like really important because it's the source of creation working through us as the vehicle of its own self-knowledge and self-expansion and self-wisdom, etc. And so each human life is so vital to the life of the whole universe. It's so important. Each one of us is a facet on the same diamond. You know, if you've got a beautiful, perfect diamond with all its facets and then you like wreck one, you know, then the diamond's not so valuable anymore. The whole diamond suffers, right? So yes, each one of us is valuable. Each one of us is important. But the feeling that I as an individual have to hold up the whole universe, that's illusory. That has to do with small ego. So that's what clears. The small ego is clearing. It's clearing from the different systems. And in your physiology, this is beautiful. Thank you for this beautiful question. In your physiology, it's clearing from the junction points. The junction points between what you know of to be yourself, your life, your present self, and the subtler collective level of yourself. There's a junction point in there. And this finest relative is all collective level of being. And the collective level of being, the part of you that's like expanded out and spread out and embracing the whole universe, that collective level, like I said, I did a video on it last webinar. It's all collective levels of self. So it includes all the angels and all the ascended masters and all the gods and all the devas and all the forms of self which apply themselves to your nervous system and immune system, lymphatic system, digestive system, all the systems that have fallen down and are feeling like weaker and not fully functional. This collective level of self activates, it wakes up, because we're clearing, there's a whole package of stuff. It's not just ego, there's fear and belief systems and lots of ancestral beliefs and different things because we're putting our attention right there, right? We're putting it in that gap. It softens up those blockages and it starts to dissolve them. And as they dissolve, sometimes a person feels some emotions, some of the discordant emotions that were stuck there bubbling up to the surface. But that's great because as they bubble up to the surface, we notice them, but that's also them going away. And at the same time, it's creating a cleaner inner communication within the physiology from the physical body all the way into those deep awake levels of consciousness, which are your platform or organizing structure for self-healing. So the healing starts in that gap before manifestation begins. And the initial intention rises up, and when it hits that junction between unmanifest being and the forms of being that heal, that's where the intention really gels. You could say it becomes a really concrete and clearly defined seed, and your question contained that seed so beautifully that it was super easy for me to just bring it in with my words. I'm just doing it with my words. You're doing it. You're healing yourself, but I'm getting to be your mirror and the reflection of that process, which is also super fun for me. I love it. Oh, and somebody who knows about herbs is offering some herbal remedies. Thank you. So I'm going to read, because it says to all panelists, but for everybody here, butterbur, feverfew, and kudzu are all excellent herbs for headache while you resolve the energy issues, which gives some relief. Wonderful medicine from our earth. Yes. And how does that work? Because the plants are at the y-axis, right? The plants have their physical form, but they have their intelligence. And their intelligence is rooted. The plants know. They're awake. They have the energy channels, the wakeful energy channels all cleared up. They know that they reside also at the Davic level of creation. So when you take the plant is resonating at a frequency which correlates with the well-being and the health of the physiology. And that resonation comes into the body. You take the herb, it goes inside your body, and it talks to the body in the language the body knows, which is the language of perception and experience. And the body goes, oh, it's in the digestive system. And it says, oh, I'm supposed to be functioning like this. I'm supposed to be vibrating like this. Then we eliminate the herb, and the vibration on the level of consciousness has come in like a sort of pattern, like a tuning fork, to get consciousness to vibrate at the level that will promote a physical response in the body of being back in balance again. Thank you for those herbs. That's so sweet of you. Beautiful. So butterbur, I'll say them again if anybody wants to write them down. Butterbur, feverfew, and kudzu. And Tom, can we put that in the follow-up letter so people have it written down? Thank you so much. We're doing this. Okay, I've got a few questions that came in here too, so let me get to these. So one gentleman who was here last night says, thank you so much for the fun healing. The question is, healing can be like transcending, yes? Right? Because the mind settles down to that point, that silent point of being. But if we have the thought to transcend, do we not transcend because we're having a thought? Because a thought's at the surface of the mind, right? So the thought's like an activity up here. And how can you have an activity up here, but also, like, wouldn't it inhibit the transcending process? That's his question. So in healing, do we have the silent thinking to go to the path of healing? In meditation, I need to somehow have the silent thinking of doing the technique that brings about the healing. So this is a great question. And it really ties into the algorithm we were just doing, and also our little silent period that we had. The human nervous system has the ability to cultivate a quality of flexibility that allows it to experience both silence and dynamism at the same time. And that is precisely what happens in that point at the very subtle level of being. So you have sleeping awareness and waking up awareness at the same time. In the junction between them, there's a relationship there. So that junction, that relationship becomes lively in the energy healing process. It becomes lively in the physical body, like it has a cumulative effect. It becomes lively in meditation. There are lots and lots of ways Even Vedic literature describes hundreds of ways to transcend. So that point of recognition supports a cultivation of the nervous system that allows the human nervous system to become more refined and to experience both thoughts and an intention like, oh, I've got this symptom and I need to do something about it. At the same time, the awareness can go into a kind of a state of balance where it's looking at, oh, the symptom is over here, it's so awful. And at the same time, the solution is over here and it's so lovely. And when awareness is settled down to a point of infinite balance, then we can perceive the imbalance, we can perceive the balance, and we know ourselves to be identified with that state of wholeness or totality that allows the dark and the light to come together and to form a dynamic relationship, which gives rise to the healing transformation. I hope that helps. Thank you. That was a great question. So in the beginning, probably one can tend to be a little gripped one way or the other, right? But the more you work with it, the more balanced and more refined the nervous system becomes, and then it becomes easy. So you do get stronger as you go along. You do get better. It's like practicing a musical instrument. The more you do it, the better you get. So congratulations to all of you for being with me today and for being willing to at least give it a shot. Pick up the instrument. Okay, so here's another question. Oh, of course. Of course. I hope that helps. She's saying thank you. Here's another question. It's a little more personal question. This lady says she's been dealing with ongoing sinus infections for months. One morning, laying in bed, and she kind of offered up the infection, and what she discerned was that they were being caused by mental congestion. Isn't that brilliant? Mental, because it's right up here, right? Mental congestion. I thought it was my personal mental congestion, but at some point the awareness came through that it was not mine, but that of the area that I live and work. And this particular lady, her job is to support and uphold the payment of income to doctors and nurses and medical personnel in 5 different hospitals. So that's an intense job, right? That's a job where she's dealing 5 hospitals. We have one hospital about 60 miles north of us, and the hospital has about 10,000 people in it at any moment. It's like a small city. I mean, Fairfield has 10,000 people. So there's this hospital up there, this big, multiple multi-story buildings, many big multi-story buildings up there, and there are 10,000 people milling around, in this thing. And so it's a huge thing that this woman's responsibility is to make sure that everyone gets paid. What a job. Whew. So this is her question. She feels like there's all this mental congestion, okay? So the question is how do I absorb that mental energy, or do I block it, or does one allow it to just flow through? Or how do I either do either, or is there another piece that I'm not aware of yet? Okay, it's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. We want to start by, all you guys, I'm just so happy to be answering questions today. We have to start by taking a little look at the nature of the respiratory system, because as I said, the body doesn't just speak randomly, it speaks intelligently, and it wants us to understand its language. So the respiratory, all the different parts and all the different systems of the body are different ways of breaking up the ocean. They're different points of reference in the ocean of consciousness, basically. So what the respiratory system does is it sits at the junction between individuality and universality. And the reason I say that is because if we look at the function of the respiratory system, what we see is we breathe in. So we take something that is barely manifest, the air. It's very, very subtle. So it's a very subtle structure in our world. And we bring it in. And we take it intimately, like right inside our bodies. We do that with food too, but The air comes in, it's very intimate. It becomes part of our body, and it becomes part of our body instantly, right? We breathe in, and instantly something that was outside us and was ocean-like in its nature comes in and becomes part of our bodies. And it goes right up and it feeds right into our brains, and it makes us feel good and lets us think and analyze our relationship with that universal infinite ocean of being all around us. And then we offer it back to infinity. So there's a kind of a loop in the respiratory process, right? And is it not so reflective of the loops that we make with consciousness at every point in creation too, right? Because it goes from being out here in a kind of infinite form to being highly specified, and then it goes back to being infinite again. So this is the respiratory system. And it works through these two mahamarmas, right? Because it's coming in the face, which is kind of right in the middle of the face, which is sort of the center of this Shiro Mahamarma, and then the owning of it takes place in the chest, and then it's given back. So this face area is the interface between universality and individuality. And that loop, the whole purpose of that loop is to integrate individuality with universality. It is to integrate this point, these subtle levels of the physiology, these parts. Every time you breathe, you're integrating with the collective level of self. And is that not what the air is? Every molecule, every piece of material that we breathe in has been breathed into other bodies before and carries the story of our world. It's an amazing thing. At this point, I'm actually tempted. I think I'd like to just take a moment. Again, we won't go as long as last time, but let's just take a moment of silence and just notice that in the breath. Breath is divine. Can you feel the gratitude in your breath? Feel the gratitude coming up from the heart when you give the breath back. Because it's divine. Every breath takes you a step closer to God.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
precious. Nice. Yeah. We can open our eyes. We don't, we rarely give thanks for every breath. But I understand in some parts of the world, people are giving thanks for every breath. But the fact is that the process of breathing literally integrates universality and individuality. And so every breath is a stroke of awakening. And every breath is so precious. And I know for some people, some of us who are used to the meditative process where we don't breathe, right? Mind settles down, body settles down, breathing stops. There's that, do I have to make the effort to take a breath? But it's good to have the full experience. So this, I wasn't expecting when I closed my eyes to breathe with you guys. I wasn't expecting so much gratitude to come pouring out of the Hriddya Mahamarma into the breath. But I realized that is very much like making light medicine out of water. If anybody's checked out that free offering on my website, where we infuse the water with the qualities of consciousness required to heal the body. Like, think of it, light medicines. We make light medicines. And I realized that as I was breathing and my heart was infusing my exhale with so much gratitude, gratitude is definitely one of the components of the best light medicines. And as the exhale was coming up through the sinuses, that it was the healing. So at first, I would like to start by offering the lady who asked this question to take a few breaths every day and let your heart fill with the gratitude of the nature of the respiratory system and how it is bringing you to expression of your full potential, divine embodiment, full awakening, how the breath is doing that, because that is what it does. And the gratitude, and let the gratitude come up into the sinuses and flow through those sinuses. And we're in touch. So hopefully you can let me know how that affects the infections. But I have a very good feeling about it, that because I wasn't something I planned or anything, you know, it came up spontaneously for you. So thank you. All right. I realized I was looking at questions in the in my chat box, but I've got a bunch of questions up here in my other box too. So, okay. Oh boy. So there's another one. Thank you for the question coming in the chat. I'm looking at my time and I'm not sure I can get to all. There are 9 questions here in my question box too. And I've got, I think, a couple more questions I still didn't answer over here. So I just have to do another webinar, but I'll answer as many as I can in the next few minutes. So as far as the collective, realize that you are the collective. You are the collective. That's what that whole exercise about the breath is. So sometimes, particularly depending on the condition of the ego, it's a little easier to, and remember how everything's a fractal, right? So it was easier for the man to kill the bird and figure out what was wrong with his love life by analyzing the dead bird's body than it was to simply go to the girlfriend and say, hey, what's going on, right? He decided to kill the bird instead because it seemed easier, right? So sometimes when we're dealing with a symptom or we're dealing with an imbalance, it's easier to work with it from the angle of the ancestors, or from the angle of the collective consciousness, or from the angle of past lives, or from the angle of the systems of the body, or from the angle of the cells of the body. They're all different. No matter which direction we approach it, we will eventually come back to the seed of that illness and address it at the level of the seed. Let that quality of perfection and wholeness blossom up and go into the seed, the area of the illness that's a problem, and envelop it with totality, supporting that area of the physiology to let go of the incompletions and come back to wholeness. All right. Okay, so here's a question from Canada. In biodynamic osteopathy, okay, which I don't know that much about, but this guy's an expert. So in biodynamic osteopathy, we use the term dynamic stillness, as the source of the healing sessions. Oh, whoa, that's so perfect. It feels like it might be point to this gap. Yes, 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 it's the same, it's the same, it's the same. Thank you, absolutely amazing, beautiful. Do it. And I'm grateful, even though you probably know it, even in some ways better than me, you probably work with it every day, my dear. I'm happy to provide a slightly different angle on it, because that'll help, like 2 eyes open, you know, it'll help like stretch the understanding, because it is so abstract. It is so abstract. As I mentioned at the beginning, that it's, you know, it's brought forth by our ancestors as all the mythic tales of creation. We can also see it as the yin yang symbol and many, many other forms in creation. So yes, beautiful. Okay, here's another question. This one from England. Can we please do a healing to allow all of us to connect with the gap at the most profound level of transformative way available to us all? And he says, I love you, my sweet friend. Oh, I love you too. So we kind of touched on that when we did the silence. Remember, we were talking about the gap, and then I realized, sorry, please forgive me, I realized I was ignoring my question box. I'm so sorry. I think I'm going to let the silence that we did there be that for everyone. And if you want to go, anybody who wants to go back and review that part of the session, we can do it with that intention, the intention. And I love the way this man, again, the way he formed the question, he actually has already incorporated the solution. He says, with the gap at the most profound and transformative way available, we want to connect with that gap in the most profound and transformative way available to each one of us. And each one of us is going to do that differently. So I guess the key word there is allow to connect. Allow to connect. Okay, this is me going a little faster. Please forgive. I feel that energy, here's another question. I feel that energy healing has led me to a healthier way of living, eating, releasing stress. Yay! I think energy healing helps us physically take action to move forward, which then helps us then deepen our consciousness. Yes, because ultimately what we're doing is we're oscillating back and forth along these different axes. When you get yourself stabilized in the point of balance, then you can just sort of move about at will. Awareness can be up at the physical material. You look at somebody, think, oh, physically, how beautiful. Or you can look at their heart and go, oh, that person, beautiful heart, or you can go down and see that point where your consciousness merges with their consciousness and you are one being, right? So you can look at people at all different levels, up and down the field, the axis of dense to subtle, or you can look at the whole range of creation from very hellish awful to very beautiful heavenly. And because the stability is there, there's this autonomy to move freely through the whole thing. And what happens is, because of that, we tend to swing. We go back and forth like the breath, right? It's like it's out here and it's part of the ocean of life, and then I breathe it in, and then it's me, it's my body, and then I give it back. So there's this swinging back and forth that happens, this wave that goes back and forth, and it affects the nervous system. When we do the energy healing, the nervous system becomes more refined. The senses of perception become more refined. Then we dive in again, and we are able to experience and do more. And then from doing more, it creates more refinement, more health in the physiology. And then from a more healthy physiology, we dive in and do more. And so it goes back and forth, and it has this like massaging effect on the entire vehicle and the entire life. Beautiful point. Thank you. Can you access the plant's resonance with actually taking the herb? Yes. And I think that question is, can you access the intelligence without actually taking the herb? And the answer is both. Sometimes, it just depends on the person and kind of like where they are in that swing, right? If the person is dealing with a symptom that's very physical and it's right on the surface, it can sometimes make a lot of sense to take a medicine, even a Western medicine. I'm not opposed. I've seen Western medicine help people. So, we do what we need to do. But when awareness becomes more refined and physiology becomes more refined, one can produce the resonance directly from consciousness. And ultimately, that's what we're working on doing in the energy healing process. And that's what we did in that exercise with the breath, right? Was that we had the breath, and then the resonation, there was a resonation of consciousness that came up through the body that had a lot of gratitude. Here's a comment. There's another comment. I'll hopefully get to those in just a second. I've got 2 more questions up here, though. Whatever, when the lungs use only a little of their capacity and don't breathe deep. Oh, so I think she's asking, like, what happens if you don't breathe deep? The thing is that usually the apneustic breathing is what that's called, when like a person's transcending and they're not taking any breaths for a long. Yeah, what about? Right, what about? Okay, so what about when the lungs use only a little bit of their capacity without breathing? Right, and so that apneustic breathing is always a reflection of it happens when consciousness has become extremely settled. So at that time, that extremely settled state of consciousness itself is the healing. That is the healing. And don't worry about it. When you do breathe, it'll be beautiful and it'll be more rich than ever before. I am back on my chat. Okay, so any tips on clearing or transforming the areas we reside, whether it be the home or work, to provide more conducive healing atmosphere of rest and healing? Yes, I've got some tips on that. Actually, I think I'm going to let you check my website. I've got a residential clearing page on my website, and I offer a clearing for residences. But I would like to add to that one of the principles there is you can You can use selenite. Selenite is a stone. It's a very inexpensive stone. Glacial selenite, sometimes they call it. And when you have multiple pieces of selenite and you set them around anywhere, they create an energy grid, which is very orderly. And so you can put the selenite in the four corners of the house, and it sets up an energy grid in the house. And it supports the energy to be more orderly there, and it helps keep those darker energies aligned in such a way that they have a more creative or beneficial effect in the house. But there are a lot of things we can do on the level of consciousness that it's too long. I can't answer it fully here, but we can go into that in perhaps another webinar or something. And then Stephen Stephen Berner writes beautifully about plant resonance and spirituality. For those who want to know more, ooh, that sounds good. He calls it plant intelligence. Boy, it sure is. Okay, and a big thank you there. So everyone, thank you for being with me, and thank you for patiently being with me through to the end. Thank you to all, and one lady saying thank you to all attendees, that her heart is imploding with love and gratitude for everyone. So I feel the same way. I'm so, so grateful for this chance to be with all of you. I can't tell you what it means. It's so wonderful to be able to do this work. Yeah, thank you for the awesome webinar and for the questions and sharing. Thank you. Big love and gratitude. All right, my dears. So I'm going to sign off. I just want to thank everyone again for being with me. And, please feel free to email me if you have more questions. We'll do another webinar in about 3 weeks. And next week, I'll be in Northern California doing live workshops and healing consultations for about a week, San Rafael and Walnut Creek, and I hope to see some of you there. I'm excited. So thank you. See you all soon. Take care. Bye.